Okay, so just going to quickly get started. Sexual harassment prevention training for employees. In this case, I know this is the docent group, the volunteers, but when it comes to sexual harassment, we are going to put you in the same category as employees. So the content in this presentation will apply to you as well. So again, this presentation provides you with information on how to recognize sexual harassment and reviews our company policy and procedure on responding to and reporting sexual harassment concerns. I know a lot of times there's a lot of talk in a workplace about preventing harassment, but what is harassment? We don't always truly understand what that means. We can all agree that someone touching you inappropriately at work is harassment, right? But there are other forms of harassment. Maybe a supervisor, someone who manages you screaming at you, or another employee screaming at you or other people in the workplace. Is that unlawful harassment? What about when a coworker stares at you a little too long? Is that harassment? And throughout today's training, we will focus on how to be more aware of this and how to prevent it. It's important to note that it is the responsibility of everyone, right, of employees and of volunteers to make sure that we maintain an environment that is free of any form of harassment. And I'm sure you may have all sat through some type of sexual harassment training. So my goal here is not to tell you something that you may not already know about this issue, right? And remember, it's not about what you know, but it's what you are doing or choosing to do when you are put in these situations. And every now and again, we just need a little refresher. So let's start with a few questions that I want you to consider as we go throughout this session. Your boss or your someone that you report to keeps asking you personal questions, including some about your relationships and maybe some sexual experiences. Was that harassment or was that not harassment? Let's see, you offer to help a coworker or a co-volunteer with a new assignment, and their response was, nothing I can ask you for here, right? Maybe they make some type of backhanded comment. Maybe you found it offensive. Would that be sexual harassment or not sexual harassment? You walk into a conference room, a coworker looks you up and down and shouts 8.5, right? And everyone starts laughing. Do you think that's sexual harassment or is that not sexual harassment? Or maybe they look you up and down and says, hey, she's a 10 or he's a 10, right? So whether or not a behavior is sexual harassment depends on the context and the interpretation of the receiver. Okay, so you may find it hard to respond to some of those questions, but keep in mind whether or not behavior is sexual harassment, it depends on the person that it's directed to, right? At the most basic level, you and everyone else should be able to feel comfortable in the workplace, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, or appearance. And if something at work is making you or someone you know feel upset, embarrassed, or uncomfortable, then it should be reported. So our agenda for today is to cover these items. What is sexual harassment? Why is it important to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace? We're going to discuss our policy and the procedures, and then your responsibilities as well. So what is sexual harassment? It's unwelcome sexual advances. And that's the key word here, is unwelcome. If it's unwanted, if it's unwelcome, then it may be crossing the lines into sexual harassment. Sexual harassment can look like requests for sexual favors. And it's also other verbal, written, electronic, or physical conduct of a sexual nature that affects an individual's employment, right? It affects their, you volunteering with that organization. It unreasonably interferes with his or her work performance, right? It creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. So there are two forms of sexual harassment. We have one, quid pro quo, and that's Latin for this for that or something for something. I often refer to that as, tit for tat, right? And then we have two, the hostile work environment. And so these are the two forms. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into each of these forms. So one, we have the quid pro quo. That's tangible employment actions against the victim. It involves monetary loss or change in your job or change in your responsibilities, your duties. And only someone that can make employment decisions can engage in quid pro quo, right? They can change your hours. They can be responsible for you having that volunteer assignment or not. They can be responsible for, changing your schedule or making things happen, right? Hiring, terminating, making sure you get a promotion, making sure that you get more volunteer hours, whatever that looks like. This has to be someone above you that can make decisions related to your position. So example, Yvette receives a smaller performance-based pay increase than other employees with similar performance because she refused to go on a date with her supervisor, right? It could be, do this for me and I'll do this for you, right? Do this for me and I'll make sure you get this internship, or I'll make sure you get this volunteer opportunity. And don't do this for me and we're going to let you go, or we're going to have to cut your hours. So I hope that makes sense. And then the second form is hostile work environments. Anyone can create a hostile work environment that can go up and down the chain, up and down the organizational hierarchy, right? And so that looks like speech or conduct that is severe and or pervasive enough to create an abusive or hostile work environment. So for example, Max is leering at and intentionally brushing up against Vanessa, right? We have someone maybe that's intentionally, right, making you uncomfortable and doing little things in the workplace. And sometimes I tell people we just have to check our level of friendliness in the workplace because, you got to keep in mind intent versus impact. Well, my intent was I was just being friendly, right? That's just my personality. But the impact, it made that person uncomfortable. Okay. So hostile work environment, in addition to speech and or conduct, hostile work environment covers explicit or suggestive items that are emailed, text, electronically provided or displayed in the workplace that interfere with job performance or that create an abusive or hostile work environment. So for example, you have someone that is sending inappropriate messages, right? It's circulating in the workplace to the coworkers with sexually explicit jokes and pictures, right? Maybe they have your email, you have everyone's emails, we have a volunteer list and everyone has everyone's email, but now we have someone sending some inappropriate jokes. So maybe they're sending pictures, right? If you take offense to that, right? If it's unwanted, if it's unwelcome, then that may be crossing the lines. So who can commit sexual harassment? Well, employees at all levels can do so. Customers, vendors, clients, volunteers, contractors, right? Members of the same sex or opposite sex. There's a myth that says, well, only a man can sexually harass a woman. Well, that's not true, right? We can have a man harassing a woman harassing a man harassing another man, and a woman harassing another woman. Okay, who can be the victim of sexual harassment? Individual or individuals targeted by statements or actions, and then bystanders or witnesses not directly targeted. right? So we have to be careful of our behavior and of telling maybe inappropriate jokes or, in the workplace, because the person you're speaking to, they may think it's funny and you guys are just kind of having a moment sharing those jokes. But if someone else walks up, if they're privy to that conversation, if they're offended by those jokes, then it could be a hostile work environment for them. So although 2/3 of the EEOC's guidelines deal with quid pro quo, remember that's tit for tat, this for that, do this for me and I'll do something for you, or don't do this for me and I can make your life a little difficult here, right? But the most common form of sexual harassment, it's the hostile work environment. That's because anyone, right, can create a hostile work environment. Anyone involved in the workplace, a supervisor, a coworker, subordinate, vendors, volunteers, patients, or other outside third parties. So what creates a hostile working environment? I really wanted to provide you more examples of what this can look and feel like in the workplace. Toxic, vulgar language, offensive language, jokes, gestures, or comments, sexual touching, jokes, propositions, degrading comments, embarrassing questions, right? Like in the example, you walk into the room and someone's like, hey, I'm going to give her a 10, right? Or, hey, that person's only a 2. Everyone's laughing, right? They're making jokes at your expense, and it's embarrassing, right? That's a form of a hostile work environment. Sexual pictures, calendars, graffiti or objects, posters or t-shirts with offensive sayings, circulating offensive emails, texts, or letters, and then offensive emails, and even cartoons. That can create a hostile work environment. So I want you to, and if you have a chat feature, go ahead and use your chat feature. So sexual harassment is defined by its blank, not its blank. What do you think goes there? I'm going to give you a minute if you want to use the chat feature. I'll give you a minute to just think, how would you complete this sentence? Sexual harassment is defined by its blank, not its blank. So sexual harassment is defined by its impact, not its intent. Okay. It's the impact. And so this is why we have to be mindful of intent versus impact in the workplace. This is why we have to at times check our level of friendliness in the workplace, right? It was just my intention to just be funny. It was my intention just to tell this joke, right? Other people laughed. I thought it was okay, right? But what was the impact that it had on your peers, on your colleagues, of others, right, in your area? So sexual harassment is defined by its impact, not its intent. And so we want to make sure that we know the signs. So I've given you some examples. We want to talk a little bit more about some of the signs that we see in the workplace. So flirting versus harassment, right? This is one of those things that could be unintentional, right? That's just me, that's my personality, but the impact, right, that it could cause in the workplace. So flirting versus harassment. Flirting defines some smiling at someone you find attractive once in a while, right? That's just flirting, right? But it can cross the lines into harassment, repeating the smiling gesture when the other person seems resistant or uncomfortable, right? This is when we have to pay attention, right? Again, check our level of friendliness in the workplace when we're dealing with others, okay? Kind of like bullying, right? When you're doing something or you're saying something and the other person's not laughing, that means you're probably crossing the lines, and we have to pay attention in the workplace to how they respond or how they don't respond, okay? So when does flirting become sexual harassment? Well, flirting becomes sexual harassment when it's unwanted and persistent. Remember, if it's unwelcome and unwanted, you're crossing the lines of sexual harassment, or someone is crossing the lines. Now, you may have one person who they just love, that someone is flirting with them, and you may be looking on the outside saying that's just inappropriate. But if that person is okay with it, then it's not sexual harassment. But if you are the receiver of the flirting, if you're on that receiving end and you don't like it, right, then that can be crossing the lines of sexual harassment. You may have a person that comes in, they just flirt with everybody, and some are okay with it. But then for the ones who are not okay with it, you need to speak up. Don't just let it go because others are comfortable with it and others, it's not unwelcome to them, right? It's up to the individual. So just keep that in mind. So again, flirting becomes sexual harassment when it's unwanted and when it becomes persistent. It doesn't matter who initiates the flirting or when it happens. If it's unwanted and persistent, it should stop. And it's not always easy to distinguish naive behavior from sexual harassment because sometimes it is unintentional, right? So I'm going to offer some tools that will help you recognize the signs of sexual harassment. Severe behaviors are easy to recognize, right? But it's those that fall into those gray areas that sometimes we just don't know and we may need help with. So I'm going to share some of that information. So Cooper's 6 levels. Ken Cooper's 6 levels is a tool that outlines the spectrum of sexual harassment, ranging from aesthetic appreciation to ultimate threats. Here we go. So we have level 1, aesthetic appreciation. And these are subtle or maybe not so subtle remarks or behaviors. For example, the lifted eyebrow, the wink, the wolfish smile, or the slyly sexual joke. Level 2, active mental groping. And this includes things like unwanted staring or just glaring, someone glaring at you, even after you walk away and you look back and they're still just kind of glaring at you, right? Or they're making inappropriate verbal comments. It isn't unwanted touching, but to the victim, it can feel like it. So we have level 3, the social touching. And this is actual physical contact that barely stays within the boundaries of appropriateness. What does this look like? It looks like maybe an unwanted back rub or the hand on the back that stays there just a bit too long, right? Or maybe you're shaking hands with someone and it just lingers and they just don't let go. They try to hold on just a little bit too long. Okay. If it's unwanted, if it's unwelcome, right, it may be crossing the line. Level 4, foreplay harassment, where touching begins to move into inappropriate areas, maybe touching someone on the small of the back or even the backside, anywhere that's considered a bit more sensitive than level 3. Level 5, we have sexual abuse, and this is clear sexual harassment, like pinching, groping, and that quid pro quo behavior, like a proposition in return for some kind of reward. Level 6, the ultimate threats. And this is just outright sexual harassment, that there is no doubt what they did and they know what they did. Okay, so the ultimate threat, this is outright sexual harassment that causes physical harm or threats of assault for non-compliance. And many high-profile sexual harassment cases talk about level 6, but that does not discredit assault at lower levels. Okay, and again, sexual harassment can look and feel differently for everyone, right? You may be okay with the back rubs, and it may make someone else uncomfortable. Sometimes in workplaces, at the end of the day, you may have someone that, hey, I know you've had a bad day, and they start rubbing those shoulders and, touching the back, and you got to pay attention because if they're kind of moving their shoulders, they're kind of giving you a look, but not saying, I'm going to need you to stop, right? You need to stop. And just because someone doesn't say they're offended, just because someone doesn't say, I need you to stop, if their body language is saying stop, then we need to stop. We have to tune in and we have to pay attention. But more than anything, we have to check this now that we know these things can be considered forms of sexual harassment. If we're doing this, we may need to step back a little bit, right? So the effects of sexual harassment. 1 in 3 people in the US admits to being sexually harassed at work, according to a poll from Business Insider. That's huge, right? So with 33% of the American workforce reporting they have been subject to some form of sexual harassment in the workplace, if you work at a company with at least 3 people, or just look around, right? Look in the gallery, you can see everyone. Maybe one of those 3 people have dealt with some form of sexual harassment, reported or maybe unreported. You know, there are many hidden effects of sexual harassment: post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, depression, anxiety, right? Sexual harassment can cause both mental health distress, high blood pressure, trouble sleeping, heart disease, and physical health problems. And the hidden effects of sexual harassment can be both severe and long lasting. So maybe if you're the person who are unintentionally doing some of these things, maybe you're the one that you kind of like, you are a person who like to hug and you like to do whatever, right? We got to check that at the door. We have to check that now, right? And we have to self-reflect to say, is this what I do? Have I unintentionally made someone uncomfortable, right? Even if they didn't tell you. You can certainly offer, oh my God, so-and-so, I'm so sorry. I think that's me, but I did not mean it. And they may know you didn't mean it, right? But just understand these things can impact someone physically and mentally. You don't want to be the cause of someone dealing with anxiety. Every time they come into the workplace, every time it's their shift to volunteer, right? Because of the things maybe you're doing on purpose or maybe unintentionally. So we have to check these things. Self-reflection is key, and it's often the hardest part. And even if that is part of your personality, we have to take a step back and say, is this really appropriate in the workplace? So let's talk about secondhand sexual harassment. The effects of sexual harassment don't just stop at one person. Kind of like I mentioned, earlier, if you're a bystander or you're privy to some jokes or some, water cooler conversations and things are being said and inappropriate jokes are, being said, right? It can impact other people that maybe you didn't intend for it to impact. So the ripple effect of sexual harassment can affect others in the workplace by making them feel uncomfortable, stressed, and making the workplace more hostile for those affected and impacted. So why is it important to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace? Well, first and foremost, sexual harassment harms us all, right? The most important part of our corporate values is to ensure all employees, volunteers, clients, contractors, that they're treated with respect and dignity, right? They feel safe coming into the workplace. Engaging in condoning and not reporting, right? Sexual harassment is in direct conflict with our values, right? Because what we don't address, what we don't report, we make it okay. We want to remain in compliance with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits sex discrimination, including sexual orientation and gender identity or expression. And we want to remain in compliance with similar state civil rights laws and fair employment laws. So I want to briefly discuss the policy and the procedure on sexual harassment. So I know that everyone receives a volunteer booklet or maybe that's in the process. And so with that, there is a policy on harassment. And I want to make sure that you are familiar with that policy I haven't seen the volunteer guide, but I want to make sure that you know that you can report this. Even as volunteers, we want you to report this. So if you are consistently dealing with something, if you're dealing with something that's persistent in the workplace, right? We want you to bring that to our attention. Okay, whether it's going directly to the person in charge of you, in charge of your volunteer program, if it's coming to HR, we have a compliance hotline that you can report this anonymously. Whatever you do, we want you to speak up and bring it to our attention, because at Philbrook, there is zero tolerance for any form of harassment, all right? Any form of retaliation, right? Zero tolerance. And I know it's not an easy thing to do, but we need you to do it, okay? It's part of your responsibility. So we want you to know your responsibilities. Know and comply with the policy and the procedures for reporting. If you're not comfortable coming forward, then report it anonymously. But whatever you do, speak up so it can be addressed. And it's also protecting your colleagues, right? If you're dealing with it, maybe somebody else is dealing with it, right? Report incidents that you experience directly or witness. Even if you witness something, just bring it to our attention. So we'll at least know, we know what's going on and can do our due diligence and look into that situation, at least have the conversations. But remember, it's only sexual harassment if it's unwanted and if it's unwelcome. It doesn't mean it's not inappropriate, right? Because that person could still deem that to be, well, that's not sexual harassment because I'm okay with the flirting. I'm okay with this behavior, but it could be making someone else uncomfortable and thus leading to a hostile work environment. And even though it may not be legal sexual harassment, it could still be considered inappropriate workplace behavior. Your responsibility, if called, forward, if we contact you because maybe your name was given as someone that may have relevant information, right? It's your responsibility to cooperate with investigations. And then we want to make sure that we are supporting the victims and not placing blame, because it takes an act of courage to come forward. Even more, it takes an act of courage to let the perpetrator know that your behavior needs to stop, that your behavior is making someone or them uncomfortable. So we want you to know your responsibilities. So here are a few steps to take if you are being harassed. So when speaking directly with the harasser, if you feel comfortable enough to do so, okay? Not make flippant remarks, not apologize for asking for that behavior to be stopped. And I see this a lot, right? Someone is being harassed, or maybe they're on the back end of some of these back rubs or just inappropriate comments. And then when they do have the courage to speak with the harasser, what do they say? I'm sorry to have to ask you this, but can you please stop? No, right? Are they more likely to stop if you're saying, I'm sorry to ask you, but can you please stop? Or this is making me uncomfortable. I need this to stop, right? So never apologize for asking someone to stop that inappropriate behavior. Use I messages. I feel uncomfortable when you, okay? Tell the person specifically what you consider unwelcome, because otherwise they may not know. Most times the harasser doesn't find offense in what they're doing. They don't think that what they're doing is wrong. Now, sometimes they know, right? But sometimes if you just leave it open, it's like, okay, well, great conversation. I don't know what I need to do differently. Okay, be ready for a less than positive response, including anger or blame. That can happen. And then number 6, tell the person how you want to be treated in order to maintain a professional relationship. Now, keep in mind, addressing the harasser is not legally required, but since because it's an abuse of power. And so only do this if you feel comfortable doing so. You don't have to address the person, but you still should bring it to our attention. Okay, telling them to stop is a means of regaining control, but don't put yourself in a dangerous situation. Okay, if you have any concerns about speaking directly to the harasser, then don't do it. Again, you have no legal obligation to confront the harasser, but remember, your conversation with the harasser is not a substitute for making a complaint or having an investigation conducted by the organization. So even if you have that conversation, it's still helpful to bring it to our attention if you're comfortable doing so. Okay, just in case we've had other people have these conversations with the same person, then we can see this is a pattern, right? So just keep that in mind. So next, we want to encourage, support, and act. So bystander responds to sexual assault, to sexual harassment in the workplace. If you see something, say something, but sometimes we don't know what to say, but we want to say something. We want to create a speak up culture, right? Where we speak up for ourselves and we speak up for our colleagues, because sometimes you do have people who just endure that behavior. I don't want to be the one to blow the whistle. I don't want to be the one to make a report, right? I don't want to be the one to get someone in trouble. So at times we have to be the voice for someone else in the workplace, and that's okay. So let's few things to think about. So you're at a work function and you think one of your friends or one of your colleagues is receiving unwanted attention from another coworker or colleague. What is the best thing to say to your friends? Do you walk up and say, hey, are you being sexually harassed? Or do you say, are you two having a good time? What do you think? Feel free to put your answer in the chat or just think about how you would respond in that situation. So the correct answer is, are you two having a good time, right? It is best to say something non-confrontational to both parties, like, hey, how's it going? Are we having a good time here in a situation like this? And you can let your friend know that you've got their back, but you're also letting the other party know that you're aware of what's going on. Essentially, you're putting them on notice that I see you, right? So confrontation. Is confrontation a good idea? Well, it depends on the circumstance. Many times sexual harassers don't see their own behavior as wrong, okay? So confrontation can be okay, and it can be a good thing in some cases. In many cases, you just have to say something, right? It can be a good idea to say something which lets the person know that you think their behavior is inappropriate, that you have noticed, okay? And this is where you need to use either your own judgment or seek advice. Okay, I'm noticing some things, it doesn't feel right, right? I want to seek advice, right? How should I handle this? How should I approach this situation? But keep in mind, when confronting someone about a harassing behavior, avoid using any specific people's name, as this may make the situation worse, right? So maybe you're on the job, or you're doing something and you happen to notice something, right? And then they part ways. Well, you can still approach that person, right? But don't mention the name. You want to say, hey, people, I'm just letting you know, people are uncomfortable when you act this way, versus saying, oh, Amanda is very uncomfortable when you act this way. So keep it open, right? Because we don't want that person to go back to Amanda or go back to that person and say, what did you say? Right? You're just letting them know, I've noticed the behavior and it's making people uncomfortable. Okay. So don't just be a bystander. I want you to follow these tips to move yourself beyond bystander to encourage, support, and act. Number one, talk to the victim, right? Speak with empathy and let them know that they have your support. Don't place blame. Okay. Take timely notes. If you're seeing something and you're just not sure if it's really sexual harassment, because maybe they're both engaging and they both seem to be okay, but in your opinion, it seems to be inappropriate, or you really can't tell if something wrong is going on, then take notes, right? Whether you actually have some paper, take out your phone and, the notepad and just, hey, this is what I saw. This is the day, the time. This is what I witnessed, right? So take timely notes whenever you see something happen, record the time and place so you can support the victim if they decide to make a report, right? Because maybe something's going on in that person, maybe look back at you or they're just looking around, but they don't know how to excuse themselves from that situation. But by you recording that, when they actually do file a report, it could be a week later, right? Then we have that documentation. We have that witness. Okay. And then if you notice a victim stuck in an uncomfortable situation, give them an escape if you feel safe enough and comfortable enough to do so. Go up to them and ask them if they'd like to get coffee or tea, or say, hey, we're late for a meeting, right? Just whatever you can say, because sometimes you have people stuck in a situation with someone and they don't know how to respectfully, right, excuse themselves or to walk away. And maybe they don't always feel safe enough walking away from a harasser. But if you see it and you see someone that's really uncomfortable, you can just go up and say, hey, I think we have a meeting, or hey, did you want to grab some coffee, or whatever comes to mind. They may say, oh, yes, oh my God, thank you for rescuing me. Thank you for doing that, right? Discuss it, record it, right? Write it down. Versus they may say, oh no, I'm okay, right? But at least we can say, I've done my part. So breaking the silence, preventing harassments. We can all be bystanders, and everyday events unfold around us. And at some point, we will register someone in danger. If you never register someone in danger, that's great. But it may come a time where you perceive someone to be in danger. When this happens, we have to decide to do or say something, right? We can either become an active bystander or simply let it go and remain a passive bystander. When we intervene, we signal to the perpetrator, to the harasser, to the aggressor that their behavior is unacceptable. But most of all, you're putting them on notice that somebody else has witnessed that, right? So if such messages are constantly reinforced, if we create a culture that everyone is accountable for speaking up, then we can shift the narrative, right? We can shift the boundaries of what is considered acceptable, and problem behavior can slowly start to stop. Okay, so learning to recognize when someone is in danger and how you can intervene safely, that's an essential skill, but we have to pay attention, right, in the workplace. Safely intervening could mean anything from a disapproving look, right? Maybe you're glaring at them like, I'm trying to get your attention, like, I see you, right? Because sometimes if they know somebody else is looking, it's going to stop it in the moment. Okay, so maybe just a disapproving look, interrupting or distracting someone, not laughing at a sexist or violent joke, because that happens, right? Someone is telling jokes, telling inappropriate jokes, and you feel that you just have to laugh, right? But when you stop laughing, that can change the narrative. Okay, talking to a friend about their behavior in a non-confrontational way, to caring for a friend who's experienced problematic behavior with that person. And then other times it means asking your friend or your colleague or someone else for help. I want you to also think about the ABC approach. Okay, A, assess for safety. And even though we may want to intervene, right, we want to make sure that we feel safe enough to do so. Maybe you've known this person to be aggressive in the workplace, or you just feel uncomfortable around this person and you're like, I see it, but I don't want to say anything. So I first want you to assess for safety. Okay, if you see someone in trouble, ask yourself if you can help safely in any way, because your personal safety is a priority. So never put yourself at risk. B, be in a group. Sometimes when you're all volunteering or doing something together and you notice one person, maybe something is not right. Sometimes it's safer to, as a group, or grab someone and say, hey, come up here with me. I'm going to, rescue this person, right? That's an option. It's safer to call out behavior or intervene in a group if you can. If that's not an option, then just report it to management, report it to someone else. And then we want to care for the victim. Talk to the person who you think may need help, and because they may not need help. This is based on our perception. And just ask them if they're okay. They may say, no, I'm not okay. Thank you so much. Or they may say, I'm okay. Oh, we joke around like that all the time. Oh, that's my friend. Oh, they're okay with that. So lastly, I want to talk about the 4 Ds of intervention. So when it comes to intervening, we want to do it safely. So I want you to remember the 4 Ds: direct, distract, delegate, and delay. So we're going to go through each one of these. So number 1, direct action or approach. We want to call out the negative or inappropriate behavior, tell the person to stop, or ask the victim if they are okay. And do this as a group if you can. Be polite, right? Be respectful. You don't want to aggravate the situation. So we want to remain calm and state why something has offended you. And then stick to exactly what has happened. Don't exaggerate. So what could that look like? That's not okay. And when we talk about the 4 Ds of intervention, we're talking about sexual harassment, but any other harassment that could take place in the workplace. So direct approach, well, that's not okay. Let's talk about this after this meeting. Wow, or that's not cool. If you see someone, if you hear someone saying something inappropriate or telling, a joke that's just inappropriate for the workplace, right? Just say, oh, wow. Well, that's not cool, because in that sense, you're kind of using a direct but indirect approach. Okay. I don't think they finished their thought. Can you say more if someone's being interrupted? Right? I'm not comfortable with how this conversation is going. I'm not comfortable with what you just said. I'm not comfortable, period. Okay. So next we have distract, disrupt, interrupt, start a conversation with the perpetrator to allow their potential target to move away, or have friends or someone to intervene, or come up with an idea to get that victim out of this situation. Tell them they need to take a call. You need to speak with them. It's lunchtime. Let's go get coffee or some hot chocolate. Any excuse to get them away to safety. Alternatively, try distracting or redirecting the situation. What does that look like, right? You see something going on. Again, it's based on your perception, but at least we want to do something. So, oh, I just realized we need to be in another meeting right now. Drop something or start coughing. Make your presence known, right? If you're walking, you just happen to see somebody over here by the window or something not going on, drop something, right? It's putting them on notice that I see you. Somebody else is a witness to whatever may or may not be going on. Okay. What agenda item does this relate to? Let's move on and come back to this item later. So delegate if you are too embarrassed or too shy to speak out, or if you don't feel safe enough to do so, get somebody else to step in. And this is if you're in that situation and you don't feel comfortable reporting, you don't want to be that person. Is there a coworker that would have a voice for you, that you would trust telling your story, right? Or if you see it, right? You're a bystander, but I just don't feel comfortable saying anything. You may think that's not my place. I don't know what's going on, right? Then enlist the help of your other colleagues, right? A manager or HR, but just get somebody else involved. And then let them determine, based off of fact finding, did something inappropriate occur? Maybe not, right? But at least we're creating an environment that we start to feel safe speaking up, because we know that everybody is, being intentional on paying attention. Then we start to feel safer that this is not going to occur. And if it is, then it's going to come to an end. And so lastly, we have delay. If the situation is too dangerous to challenge, then and there, such as there is a threat of violence or you are outnumbered, right? Because sometimes we just don't know what could happen in the workplace. Just walk away. Wait for the situation to pass and ask the victim later if they're okay, or go get help in that moment. Report it. Okay. Report it when it's safe to do so. Just remember, it's never too late to act. As we go throughout this presentation and as I'm wrapping up, if you can think of things that you have done, we want to make sure you modify and change your behavior. But if you're thinking of situations where there's someone that has put people in this situation multiple times and I never said anything about it, maybe we need to speak up, right? Because what we don't address, we make it okay. And we can't fix what we don't know is going on. So in summary, sexual harassment is unwelcome. If it's not unwelcome, if it's not unwanted, it's not sexual harassment. Now, it could still be inappropriate behavior, but it's not sexual harassment. Okay. So sexual harassment is unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal, written, electronic, or physical conduct of a sexual nature that affects an individual's employment and reasonably interferes with his or her work performance or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. And there are two forms of sexual harassment. We have the quid pro quo and hostile work environment. It's important to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace because it harms everyone. It conflicts with our corporate values that all employees are treated with respect and dignity. Sexual harassment is illegal under federal and state laws, and your responsibilities regarding prevention of sexual harassment are to know and comply with the company policy and reporting procedures. Report incidents that you experience directly or that you witness, cooperate with investigations. And then we want to make sure that you are supporting the victims, you're supporting your colleagues. We're not placing blame. So a few quick reminders. Step forward. In order to protect yourself and possibly others from harassment, you need to be responsible and step forward. Everyone is accountable for creating a harassment-free and productive work environment. Supervisors have a duty to report. If a supervisor learns about the problem in a social context, he or she still has a duty to report. Okay, the organization should be involving people on a need-to-know basis, and then there is zero tolerance for retaliation. There is zero tolerance for preventing someone from reporting this. Okay, so remember, it's not okay if it's unwanted, if it's unwelcome, it's harassment. So with that, thank you for joining. I have put my contact information on here in the event that you have any questions or you have concerns or something maybe has happened in the past that you just want to talk through. So you're certainly welcome to go to Tracy, but I wanted to give you my information in the event you want to reach out to me directly. So with that, I'm going to stop recording and stop sharing.